Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome back. You made it to week 2. Congratulations. Sometimes I think making it past the first week is one of the greatest feats of this class. So as you experienced, week 1 was tough. The readings were difficult to get your, I guess, just to overall comprehend the language and I guess even some of the words and the terms and all of that business. So congratulations, you made it to week 2. So I promise you it gets a lot easier as far as the readings go. But I think Delio sets a great tone for this class. I think she outlines a lot of really important topics when we're considering wholeness and holism as part of our really our underpinnings for leadership, for well-being, for lots of things. So hopefully you got a lot out of what she wrote, and you watched her video, and I suppose I'm just guessing you probably read it. Some of those sentences a few times, or pages, chapters, whichever. So, but I wanted to just to recap a little bit so we can use that work and then move on to what we're doing this week. So I think it's a good place to start. We didn't really talk about this last time because I didn't want to start with this, but what does holism or holistic mean? What does that approach mean? And so, okay, so everything that we do in here, we're going to tie back to leadership and well-being. So what does this mean? And if you put it into, if you type this stuff out on your computer, it's going to come up with holistic starting with an H and not a WH. So that might be a good place to start. So why do I put WH? Well, it seems to make more sense to me. And we're talking about the whole, and I don't mean a whole, but the whole, to use WH as in holistic. And it seems, crazy. Why do you consider either? What does it matter? And it really doesn't at all. But holism in the way I am viewing it and hopefully getting across in this class as we continue to move through it, means considering everything that is, all that is. And that means all that is physically, all that is in our ways of thinking. But hopefully now, after reading Delio's work, that we're moving beyond that into looking at all that is as far as our ways of knowing and all of creation, seen and unseen, is the whole. And so what does that mean for us? For our leadership and well-being. So I'm going to come back to that question in a minute, but what I want to do is just kind of recap some of the highlights of Delio and sort of tie that back into that question. But so one of the big things that she talks about is at least setting the foundation for her work in this particular book anyway, is that we have to get past the mind as being our only way of knowing. And so I hopefully you caught that theme and thinking about it with your mind in a reflection way in what that means for our way of life as you grew up, in what kind of messaging that you received, being a child in our school systems, and having our thinking and reasoning mind being, really, if not the most important piece of your life, maybe right up there at the top as a thing that's one of the most important things, and how we're continually evaluated through our school education systems on how the thinking mind is so important, and maybe even more important than other things like relationship and so forth, because we so evaluate those so often and so critically, and that messaging comes back to us in a way that says, that this thinking mind is probably more important than anything else. And so what Delio tries to do is unravel that a little bit, and not a little bit, a lot of it. And we're going to continue to do that through other people's work, I think, as we continue to move through the course too. But to say that the thinking mind is not the only way of knowing. She didn't really come out and say that in here, but that's where we're moving in this course, is there are many ways of knowing that get beyond just our ability to reason through or to remember, memorize processes or to do, a math problem or, those types of things that we so highly value in our Western world, particularly here in the United States. And so there's more ways of knowing than just being able to think through something with our thinking minds. And so others will talk about, that you'll read and hear in this course about other minds. And what they mean is other ways of knowing. Okay, so that's part of what I hope to get to as we keep moving through. That gets to more of the whole and not just staying within our thinking mind. And what Delio did in this book, at least in the first part of this, is to lay the foundation and then to also further that of where Chronically American starts, is to go through this. Why do we so highly value? Where do we come from? How can, as far as historically, why did we fall into this thing of our thinking minds being the thing? And so she mentions Rene Descartes as one of the key people, and Isaac Newton and others as laying this scientific foundation that once we started this whole idea of science and being able to prove something, reason through something, then that actually became paramount. And then that really superseded our consciousness. But Delio turns that around in her work and says, okay, thinking mind is obviously important, but we can't lose sight of what we're really after here, and that is a greater level of consciousness. And by that, she means, and others mean too, because we're going to mention this a lot in this course, consciousness meaning a greater sense of knowing, greater ways of knowing, continually trying to know, not in the way we know in our school systems, the way we're brought up, in that we have to continually pack on more knowledge and memorize more things, but more greater, deeper understanding of the wholeness of all that is and how we fit into that. And so that's this idea of consciousness that we're going to keep moving towards in this course, that hopefully, by the end of this, you're going to be able to appreciate how this all comes together, and the importance of it in our ability to be leaders and to have a greater sense of well-being. I'm looking down at my notes so I don't forget anything. I should probably put them higher here so I don't have to continue to look down. But a couple of things and so as you may or may not have picked up, Delio is a scientist PhD, but also a Catholic nun. And so she works science into a lot of what she does. And I think that's a great approach, because so much of us, so much of what we value is being able to prove something or relate it back to science, say, oh yeah, there's really something there. We have to be able to really write it out and show it, or otherwise it doesn't exist according to our culture. We know that's not true. Hopefully we know that's not true, but that is the way we come to terms with things initially. And so that's, I think, a great approach, and that's an approach that I tend to use now too, is to use some scientific information to try to explain things that are otherwise more difficult to explain, but things that we actually know. There's a roundabout way of saying it, but so for instance, how do you know that your mom loves you? Well, you just know, right? So there's a lot of things like that we don't have to go to school and have a teacher tell us that that our mom loves us. We just know. And so there are ways of knowing that are outside of the academic model. And so that's something that is that she talks about in there is okay. So let's talk about quantum entanglement, and the way she brings this up. So I'm not a physicist. I don't pretend to be one or play one on TV, but it is really, really important stuff to understand. I think a bit of quantum physics or quantum mechanics, however you want to say it. And especially this idea of quantum entanglement, for us to start moving in a direction to say, in this idea of wholeness and holism, that everything is connected. And even so much so is that we don't even have to imagine it. Now we can actually start measuring this. And this is a concept that's not new at all. Quantum physics, quantum entanglement theory, has been around for decades, but just really not too much embraced outside of those who are working in this space. And essentially what it means, if you caught it in the book, is that that there are subatomic particles that we can't see, but that we know exist because we can measure them, that essentially say that the matter that we have, like this book or like this coffee cup, that's not actually hard matter. Well, it's compacted particles, but it's actually waves of energy, and that are more tightly compacted. And those waves of energy exist throughout the entire universe and cosmos as we know it, and that essentially connect everything. And so the idea of an entanglement is that there are connected subatomic particles that exist at great distances that don't follow the same, what we understand as laws of physics, as in time and space. And so that if you move one piece, like if I drop this pen, it actually has a if it's entangled with a particle that is in the farthest universe as we know it, they move instantly together. So if one particle moves here, it moves there at the same time. That is really hard for us to wrap our heads around that. And in fact, Einstein, when this started, he was one of the people who started in on this and actually backed off of it because it just didn't seem to be something he could really comprehend. But then, as he moved through it, Einstein was so great in a lot of ways because he wrapped in this. There's got to be more to us than what we just see here, and so he understood the world in a way that we're connected in a way that we can't hardly put our reasoning, thinking minds around. So he called it spooky action at a distance, which I thought is a great way to say it, because it's just so hard for us to understand this, how we're connected in these ways. So I think in this idea of wholeness and holism, looking at other ways to approach how we're connected is a good approach for us, and we're going to talk more about those actually here in a minute, because there's some of those other examples of this in science that we'll get into in week 2 in Chronically American. So this is, so your takeaway from this is that we're not separate parts. So I don't look at this coffee cup and this book as separately. They are something separate unto themselves, but they're only separate and whole if we understand them as being connected also. And that is a common theme for this class, especially when we move that out to ourselves, and that, okay, so we're whole unto ourselves, but we're only whole if we understand that we're only part of the whole. Okay, so that's a take home that hopefully makes sense more as we get through the class, but that's definitely paradoxical. but is something that is really important for us to try to work through. So, okay, so just finishing up some of Delio's thoughts here. So much of her work, as you probably picked up on also, is based on Teilhard's work, and that is of evolution, and that this whole experience, whatever the initial starting point was, the singularity, some people call it the Big Bang or whatever that was, or if that is even a thing, that there was a starting point that was nearly 14 billion years ago, as we know it now. That may prove at some point we may have the technology and the understanding to know that maybe that's not even a real starting point. Maybe there's something beyond that, or whatever. But as far as we know right now, there's a singular starting point that was about 13.8 billion years ago, that most call the Big Bang. But that is something that we have grown and evolved from. Okay, but this is not a stagnant process, that we continue to evolve. And if you got to her part where she talks about the encyclopedias of life, and hopefully that gave you this a little bit of glimpse in how small our experience is relative to time for our lives here compared to what we know of the universe now. And I think that's the point of that, is to say it's hard for us to recognize our involvement in this evolution, because we are here on Earth anyway, in this experience as we know it, for such a short amount of time relative to this nearly 14 billion year process of evolution as we understand it. But saying that this is one of Teilhard's points, is that this process, this is a evolution where we're continuing to evolve in a dynamic way, and that it's not just us. Okay, so that we are co-creators with God in this process, and that ties us into the whole, that we are so intimately interconnected with God in a way that we are moving through our lives in an evolutionary way, that we are co-creators, and that God is inside, God is outside, God is everywhere, as opposed to just an entity that is somewhere out there that's just pulling the strings and moving us through life somehow, but that in fact we are so interconnected that we are moving in a direction together and co-creating together in this experience. And so that in itself is very difficult to get our heads around, but if we can try to latch onto that idea and have that as part of a foundation, then our understanding of wholeness and how we are important and involved in that wholeness and that co-creation changes the way we do our work going forward. So it changes our leadership, it changes our personal well-being for sure. And so how do we get there? Well, I think so if we can move beyond our thinking minds as being the only way we know something and move towards this idea of greater consciousness, then we can, start getting ourselves moving in that direction. So how do we move to a greater level of consciousness? And well, that's where we're headed in this book, and that is through contemplation, and that's what we're going to get to as we finish up, this whole course, is understanding contemplation and how we move into a greater level of consciousness that gets us to understand this notion of transcendence, which we're moving to in this next book of Chronically American. Okay, so how does this relate to our leadership and well-being than Delio's work? Okay, so it gives us a greater thinking, knowledge, understanding but then also gives us a whole bunch of confusion and question, which is a good place to be right now, by the way. In this course, is to be utterly confused and saying this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and that's okay. But you know, for our idea of leadership is that it's not just me as an individual, you know, directing people, no matter what, you know, occupation that you have. And leadership can be anywhere. It can be, you know, family leadership of your kids and you know, whatever. Or it can be, you know, as a teacher, or it can be as a, you know, as a business leader, or whatever, a business owner. It doesn't matter. But having this notion that it's not just me. I mean, I'm connected with other people in ways that I didn't quite understand. And boy, we're going to get there in this next couple chapters when we talk about Chronically American, and there's more science to this than what we've presented so far to get us to understand that what I do, not just what I say and ask people to do, but how I carry myself and what my personal well-being is like, greatly affects others in ways that I didn't quite understand before. So I think the well-being part ties into leadership that way, but it also helps us in a way too to understand this idea of chronic disease and chronic stress, as we'll get into in Chronically American. So our topic then for week 2 now that I'm 21 minutes into this video is interconnectedness, and it's going to lay some even more foundational work on what this means. And so we're going to start off with the first 3 chapters of Chronically American and look at starting with the factors that determine health. And it's not just about me eating right and exercising and getting enough sleep, as in that are factors that determine health, but in fact my health is greatly influenced by your health, and vice versa, and so the rest of our community and community at large also. And that if I'm not well, then others are not well either, because of our connectedness with each other in ways that we didn't quite understand. And that is particularly important when you're in a leadership role. Say you're a teacher, and I mean, we know this already, but if you come to school grumpy and you're interacting with 20 or 30 people in a classroom at a time, and that energy that you are sending to the other folks in the room with you greatly influences their health, and in ways you probably didn't understand. And there's some really nice research from Christakis and Fowler that we're going to go over, and it actually doesn't come until week 3. Unfortunately, there's a little that doesn't sequentially match great, but it does, it ties in, and it'll flow hopefully nicely as we keep moving. But there's a social connection that we have with each other that is partly explained from some other work from the Heart Math Institute that we're going to look at today. And I'm just asking you, as you see in your syllabus, to look at their website and to read a little bit of their research, which is to say that they have been able to scientifically show that we have a measurable energy. So there's electromagnetic energy that all living things emit, and that includes us as people. And so this can be measured, at least from the devices we have now, and about 6 feet out from us. But that these waves of energy, okay, this ties in quantum physics also, has an effect on other people, physically and emotionally and mentally and in all ways. And so I think it's safe to say, though, that looking at this in total, that energy goes out further than 6 feet. We just don't have ability to measure it. But we know that, for instance, this is just an example, I think that's easy to understand. If we walk into a room and that room has an energy, we can feel it, right? So if we walk into a room, maybe it's a meeting, say, with your colleagues, and there's just, this lightness and this airiness, that we can pick up on, and that automatically makes us feel good, and it makes us feel more comfortable being in that space. But then there's also times when we walk into a room and there's a real heaviness there too. So there's and we know how that makes us feel individually, that affects us as individuals. So this is some of the things that Heart Math Institute is studying, is being able to purposefully send energy from yourself out to the world in a way that makes the world a better place. And that collective energy is something that is and has been measured by the Heart Math Institute. So it's not just individual, but as collective and in fact global. And that's the other link I put on there, is the work they're doing globally in this space. And it's not just even person to person, but it's from nature to person. We know that when we come home and if we're pet owners and our dog is just super happy to see us, and that he or she has some great energy, and joy and happiness and excitedness that actually comes to us, and we can feel that energy, and that goes back and forth too. And there's some great work on that. How much there's been work on pet own, somebody who has a dog and has less stress because they have a dog. There's been research on that for a long time. But I think we understand a little bit more, and that is this part of this is this energy exchange that we are having with another living being, and that being, even our pets. But there's also being measured by Heart Math Institute for trees, and that we know that if you're an outdoors person and you get outside and get amongst the trees, you're in the forest, or maybe you're just somehow being in amongst trees, that it's not just the extra oxygen that those trees are giving to you. There's an actual energy that can be measured that's coming from the trees and nature that we can feel. And so there's a lot of research that shows that being in nature is very good for our health. And so we're just starting to understand why that is. And I don't think it's all me, right? Where I go out there and, now I just feel so relaxed, and it must just be me because I'm more relaxed outside amongst these trees. There's an exchange that's happening there. You're receiving something from the living beings that are in nature, as they are receiving from you also. So there's an exchange backwards and forwards, and this is getting to how we are a lot more interconnected than what we realize. And so certainly on a level, that happens from person to person, and from groups to groups, and from countries to countries. I mean, we can make this thing, from individual out to communities to, countries, even to country. There's a collectiveness energy that can be felt and can be transmitted and received backwards and forwards, and that's something that helps us understand how we are more connected to the whole. But then certainly it gives us a better appreciation for our leadership and personal well-being, because if we always like to say this in our program, if things are going okay here, it's a lot better and okay out here. So if we start with some interiority instead of, and doing our interior work here, then things out here when we work with others is going to, go in a right direction. But if things are not settled and not okay here, it's hard for them to be okay out here because of this exchange going on. And that's hopefully you can understand that from a leadership perspective, but also from a personal well-being perspective. And so that's where the well-being of a leader matters, but also understanding personal well-being has another level of understanding. And it's not just about, okay, I need to, have my blood pressure and my cholesterol and my body weight and, all of those things in check, because it's all about me personally, and that my personal profile, health behavior, or my biometrics are where they should be for me as an individual. Well, that's important, but it matters also because it matters to the rest of everybody else that you're well, because you influence so many other people. This gets to Christakis and Fowler's work that, statistically, you have a statistical significance on out to 3 degrees of separation. Just very, very quickly, and to spill the beans on this before you get to this, I think in probably chapter 4 or so, but in Chronically American, but you probably all, the 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon thing, and that's actually true in a lot of ways. And actually there's some research to support that we are connected. This is a whole separate, really cool topic in itself, that we are connected to everyone else on the planet by an average of 6 degrees of separation, which is extraordinary to think about with the 8 billion people that live on planet Earth, that we are connected to everyone by about 6 degrees of separation. And so there's some research actually to support that. But more importantly, it's statistically significant that we influence out to 3 degrees of separation from others, people we don't even know. So a friend's friend's friend, we have an influence on attitude, behavior, even physical well-being, such as body weight, blood pressure, happiness, political views, our altruism, like wanting to help others, and volunteerism. If we go into, say, our work environment being happy, that actually has a statistically significant effect on increasing the happiness of the people we come into contact with, okay? And we kind of know that already. I mean, that's sort of, we've experienced that before, but what we probably don't know is that that affects that person, the people who come in contact with that person, and then people who come in contact with that person. So a friend's friend, people we probably don't even know, our happiness has a statistically significant influence on their happiness, as does, other things like, our like I just mentioned, if we're altruistic, then others are more likely to. So we've seen this happen over time in this country and throughout the world, where then you start collectively getting this positive energy or negative energy that just continues to grow into something that is, like a riot or a collective happiness or other, feelings, emotions that way. And so that's part of this interconnectedness story, and of course has a great influence if you're a leader or on your personal well-being too, because this is the continual exchange of what energy you're giving and what energy you're receiving. Okay, so let's sort of wrap this up after we're in this a ways here, but a major point of this is moving beyond our thinking minds as our only way of knowing into this greater level of consciousness, which is to say we are moving towards transcendence, okay, that there's something larger than me. Can we move to outside our individualism that we so highly appreciate and love and want to have and put so much on in this country as our individualism, but can we move beyond this individualism to recognize that there's something more, that we are connected to something greater, and that we can call transcendence, as in the small t transcendence being connected, but also the big T transcendence of being connected to the divine in a way that then connects us to everything. Okay, so I think one of the pieces that was so well said by Delio and others continue to say this is that this idea of our connection and our connectedness and this connected energy can simply be described as love. And I really, I was going to say I love that, but I do love that that this is what we're really talking about. We feel it, we describe it as love, and now we're wrapping our science heads around saying, wow, there's something here that I don't quite understand from a scientific perspective, but I certainly feel it. And so that's moving beyond ourselves in transcendence. So how do we do contemplation so that we can move towards transcendence? So how do we be more contemplative? And this is more to the story, and so we won't go there today, but we're getting there, and this is part of the how-to for this is being more contemplative. And so what I'd ask you to do as you're continuing to move through the readings is, how does this affect my leadership and my well-being, the well-being of people who I work with, but my own personal well-being also. Okay, so I think that's enough. We're at 35 minutes. Looking forward to continuing to read your really, really wonderful discussions and your reflections. I haven't read the reflections yet, reflection papers for week 1, but I'm looking forward to reading those. If you have questions, let me know, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks.